Have you ever wondered why some people, known for their infinite kindness and compassion, suddenly become the cruelest and most ruthless? Why that friend who was always there for everyone, one day simply switched off and became someone unrecognizable? There's a terrifying moment in every empath's life, a transformation so radical it can leave even their closest ones in shock. It's when the kindest person you know reveals a dark side you never imagined existed. Carl Jung discovered something disturbing about human nature. The more light a person carries, the denser their shadow becomes. And when an empath finally awakens to this repressed shadow, the result can be devastating for everyone around them. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see the good people in your life. Because behind the mask of infinite compassion, there's a psychological truth that Jung revealed, and it might explain why empaths, when they go to the dark side, become the most dangerous of all. The awakening of the hidden shadow. Inside every empath lies a sleeping giant, a part of their psyche so carefully hidden that even they don't know it exists. Jung called this the shadow, and for empaths, this shadow is particularly dangerous because it's been fed by years of absorbed pain, rejected anger, and suppressed boundaries. Think about it. Empaths spend their entire lives feeling everyone else's emotions. They take on the sadness of strangers, the anger of family members, the frustration of co-workers. But where does all that negative energy go? It doesn't just disappear. It gets pushed down, buried deep in the unconscious mind, creating what Jung described as a pressure cooker of repressed darkness. The empath believes they're being noble by never expressing anger, by always putting others first, by sacrificing their own needs for everyone else's comfort. They wear their endless giving like a badge of honor. But Jung understood something crucial. What we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves doesn't vanish. It grows stronger in the darkness. For years, maybe decades, the empath continues this pattern. They smile when they want to scream. They help when they need help. They forgive when they should set boundaries. Each act of selfless giving adds another layer to the shadow, another pound of pressure to the internal dam that's holding back their authentic feelings. The awakening doesn't happen gradually. It's sudden, violent, and completely unexpected. One day, something breaks. Maybe it's another betrayal from someone they trusted. Maybe it's realizing they've been taken advantage of for the 1,000th time. Or maybe it's simply the weight of carrying everyone else's burdens finally becoming too much. When this moment arrives, the empath experiences what Jung called enantiodromia, the sudden emergence of the opposite. All that suppressed anger, all those ignored needs, all that accumulated resentment comes flooding to the surface like a tsunami of darkness. The person who never said no suddenly can't say yes. The one who helped everyone now helps no one. But here's where it gets truly terrifying. This isn't just regular anger or disappointment. This is anger that's been compressed and concentrated for years. It's rage that's been refined in the darkness of the unconscious until it becomes something pure and cold. The empath doesn't just get mad. They become strategically cruel. They know exactly where everyone's weak spots are because they've been listening, caring, and absorbing emotional information for years. They know your deepest fears, your secret shames, your hidden insecurities, and now, for the first time, they're willing to use that knowledge as a weapon. The most chilling part is how calculated this transformation becomes. There's no screaming, no obvious displays of anger. Instead, there's a cold precision to their actions. They withdraw their support from those who need it most. They reveal secrets shared in confidence. They use their intimate knowledge of others' vulnerabilities to inflict maximum psychological damage with minimal effort. People around them are caught completely off guard. This isn't like them, everyone says. They would never do this. But Jung knew better. He understood that the shadow contains not just our rejected negative traits, but often our greatest potential for both creation and destruction. The more good we try to be, the more powerful our shadow becomes. The empath's friends and family scramble to understand what happened. They try to reason with this new version of someone they thought they knew. But reasoning doesn't work, because this isn't a conscious choice. It's a psychological eruption that's been building for years. The shadow has finally had enough of being ignored, and it's taking control. What makes this awakening so devastating is that the empath themselves often feels a strange sense of relief. For the first time in their life, they're not carrying everyone else's emotional baggage. They're not worried about hurting feelings or managing other people's reactions. There's an intoxicating freedom in finally letting the shadow express itself. This is when the real danger begins, because the shadow doesn't just want to be acknowledged, it wants to make up for lost time. Years of suppressed selfishness emerge as ruthless self-interest. Decades of ignored anger manifest as calculated revenge. The empath who once couldn't hurt a fly now seems capable of destroying lives without a second thought. Jung warned that the shadow, when finally unleashed, doesn't seek balance. It seeks dominance. And nowhere is this more evident than in the transformed empath who has traded their role as the world's emotional healer for something far more sinister, the world's most effective emotional destroyer, the mask of infinite goodness. What appears to be genuine compassion in an empath is often something far more complex and ultimately dangerous. Jung discovered that our personas, the masks we wear for the world, become prisons when we identify with them completely. For empaths, this mask of infinite goodness isn't just a role they play, it becomes their entire identity, and that's where the real problem begins. The empath's mask is perfectly crafted for social approval. They're always available, always understanding, always willing to sacrifice their own needs for others. Society celebrates them as the good ones, the people we all wish we could be. But Jung knew that any persona, no matter how positive it appears, becomes toxic when it's the only face we're allowed to show the world. Behind this mask, the empath is suffocating. They can't express frustration without feeling guilty. They can't prioritize their own needs without feeling selfish. They can't even acknowledge their own pain because it might burden someone else. The mask demands perfection, and perfection is a form of psychological torture. What most people don't understand is that this goodness isn't actually natural. It's compulsive. The empath doesn't choose to help everyone. They feel they have no choice. They don't want to always be available. They're terrified of what might happen if they're not. The mask isn't worn by choice. It's welded to their face by deep fears of abandonment, rejection, and conflict. Jung observed that the tighter we grip our persona, the more violent its eventual destruction becomes. The empath clings to their identity as the helper, the healer, the selfless one, because without it, who are they? They've never been allowed to discover their authentic self because they've been too busy being what everyone else needed them to be. This creates a psychological split that grows wider over time. On the surface, they're the picture of mental health and emotional wisdom. Underneath, they're drowning in resentment, exhaustion, and a growing sense of emptiness. They give and give until there's nothing left, but they can't stop giving because giving is all they know how to do. The mask becomes heavier each year. Every act of selflessness adds weight to it. Every time they swallow their anger to keep the peace. Every time they pretend to be fine when they're falling apart. Every time they choose others' comfort over their own truth. The mask grows thicker, more rigid, more suffocating. But masks aren't meant to be permanent. Jung understood that the psyche has a natural drive toward wholeness, and wholeness can't be achieved while wearing a false face. The authentic self, buried beneath years of people-pleasing and emotional caregiving, eventually demands to be seen and heard. When the mask finally cracks, it doesn't just slip off gently, it shatters. And what emerges isn't a balanced human being who's learned to integrate their light and shadow. It's someone who's been psychologically tortured by their own goodness for so long that they're ready to burn down everything they once held sacred. The person who emerges from behind the shattered mask is often unrecognizable. They've spent so long denying their own needs that when those needs finally surface, they're distorted and magnified. They've suppressed their anger for so long that when it appears, it's not just anger, it's rage. They've ignored their boundaries for so long that when they finally set them, they're not boundaries, they're walls topped with razor wire. This is why Jung warned against identifying too completely with any persona, even a positive one. The empath who has worn the mask of infinite goodness for too long hasn't just hidden their shadow from others, they've hidden it from themselves. They genuinely believe they don't have a mean bone in their body, don't have selfish desires, don't have the capacity for cruelty. But the shadow doesn't disappear just because we refuse to look at it. It grows stronger, more concentrated, more desperate for expression. And when it finally breaks free from behind that mask of perfect goodness, it's not interested in gentle integration or balanced expression. It wants to destroy everything the mask represented. The world watches in horror as the kindest person they know becomes someone capable of breathtaking cruelty. But Jung would have understood this transformation perfectly. He knew that the brightest light casts the darkest shadow, and that someone who has spent their entire life being impossibly good has created an equally impossible potential for evil within themselves. This is the terrifying mathematics of the psyche. The more extreme our persona, the more extreme our shadow becomes. And no persona is more extreme than that of the empath, who has never met a boundary they wouldn't cross for others, never encountered a need they wouldn't try to fill, never found a person they wouldn't try to save, except themselves. By the way, if you're curious to go even deeper and integrate your shadows and light, check out the SIM Method ebook. It's a concise guide that can help you unlock your inner power in just 5 minutes a day. The link is in the first pinned comment below. The moment of inner collapse. There's always a final straw, one last moment when everything the empath has built inside themselves comes crashing down. Jung called this psychological collapse the dark night of the soul, but for empaths, it's more like a complete demolition of their inner world. The foundation they built their entire identity on suddenly reveals itself to be nothing more than quicksand. This moment doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It usually comes disguised as something ordinary, a friend asking for yet another favor while ignoring their obvious exhaustion, a family member taking credit for something they sacrificed to make happen, or simply waking up one morning and realizing they can't remember the last time someone asked how they were doing and actually waited for an honest answer. But what makes this moment truly devastating isn't the trigger itself. It's what the trigger reveals. Suddenly, with crystal clarity, the empath sees the truth about every relationship in their life. They realize they've been surrounded by people who only love what they can do for them, not who they actually are. They understand that their value to others has always been measured by their usefulness, never their humanity. Jung understood that these moments of collapse aren't accidents. They're the psyche's desperate attempt to save itself. The unconscious mind finally rebels against the conscious mind's insistence on maintaining relationships that are slowly killing the authentic self. It's like the body's immune system finally recognizing a parasite and mounting an all-out attack to destroy it. In this moment, the empath experiences something they've never allowed themselves to feel before: pure, undiluted rage at being used. Not the gentle disappointment they've trained themselves to feel instead of anger. not the understanding they've forced themselves to have for everyone else's selfishness, raw, primal fury at the realization that they've been emotionally trafficked by nearly everyone they've ever cared about. The collapse isn't just emotional, it's physical. Their body, which has been holding stress and suppressed emotions for years, suddenly releases everything at once. They might experience panic attacks, chronic pain, or complete exhaustion. Their nervous system, which has been in a constant state of hypervigilance, watching for everyone else's emotional needs, finally short-circuits. What terrifies people around them is how sudden this collapse appears. But Jung knew it wasn't sudden at all. It was the culmination of years of psychological pressure building to an impossible level. Like a dam that's been developing hairline cracks for decades, when it finally gives way, the destruction is swift and total. During this collapse, the empath experiences a complete reversal of everything they once believed about themselves and others. They realize that their gift for feeling everyone's emotions wasn't actually a gift. It was a trauma response that kept them trapped in relationships with people who couldn't or wouldn't regulate their own emotions. They understand that their ability to see the good in everyone wasn't wisdom. It was a defense mechanism that protected them from acknowledging how badly they were being treated. They recognized that their endless patience wasn't virtue. It was fear of conflict disguised as compassion. The most shocking realization comes when they understand that many of the people they've helped, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally have been unconsciously feeding off their empathy like emotional vampires. These people didn't grow from the empath's help. They became dependent on it, weaker because they never had to develop their own emotional strength. This is when the empath's worldview completely inverts. Everyone they thought was struggling and needed their help suddenly looks like a manipulator who found the perfect mark. Every person they thought was grateful for their support suddenly appears to be someone who took their kindness for granted and would have abandoned them the moment they stopped being useful. Jung called this process holding the tension of the opposites, the moment when someone realizes that their greatest strength has also been their greatest weakness. For empaths, their ability to feel and heal others' pain has simultaneously been the thing that attracted people who would exploit that ability. The collapse strips away every illusion they've held about human nature, starting with their own. They realize they weren't helping people out of pure love. They were helping because they were addicted to being needed, terrified of being abandoned, and convinced that their worth depended on their usefulness to others. This recognition triggers what Jung described as a complete ego death. Everything they thought they knew about themselves dies in this moment. The helpful person dies. The understanding person dies. The patient person dies. The forgiving person dies. What emerges from this psychological wreckage isn't immediately recognizable as human. It's more like a wounded animal backed into a corner, ready to attack anything that approaches. The most dangerous part of this collapse is that it happens to someone who has spent their entire life studying human nature from the perspective of helping and healing. They know exactly how people think, what motivates them, and where their weaknesses lie. When someone with that level of emotional intelligence collapses into their shadow, they don't just become difficult, they become strategically dangerous. This moment of collapse is what transforms an empath from the world's greatest healer into its most effective destroyer. They've crossed a line they can never uncross, seen truths they can never unsee, and felt betrayals they can never unfeel. The person who emerges from this inner wreckage isn't interested in healing anymore. They're interested in something far darker, the inversion of compassion. When an empath's shadow finally takes control, something terrifying happens to their natural ability to feel and understand others. That same emotional intelligence that once made them incredible healers now becomes their most devastating weapon. Jung observed that our greatest gifts, when inverted, become our most dangerous curses, and nowhere is this more evident than in the dark empath. The empath's compassion doesn't simply disappear during their shadow phase. It transforms into something cold and surgical. They still understand exactly what others are feeling, but now they use that understanding to cause maximum emotional damage rather than healing. It's like watching a surgeon use their precise knowledge of anatomy to torture rather than heal. This inversion is what makes dark empaths so uniquely dangerous. A regular person who becomes cruel might lash out randomly, hitting whatever emotional targets they stumble across. But a dark empath strikes with precision. They know exactly which emotional buttons to push, exactly how much pressure to apply, and exactly when their target is most vulnerable to attack. They've spent years learning how to comfort people in their darkest moments. They know what those dark moments look like when they occur, and how to make them worse instead of better. They understand the exact words that will heal someone's deepest wounds, which means they also know the exact words that will tear those wounds wide open again. Jung described this phenomenon as the shadow expressing the opposite of our conscious values. The empath, who once used their emotional intuition to know when someone needed extra support, now uses that same intuition to know when someone is too emotionally fragile to defend themselves. They strike when their targets are already down, already vulnerable, already struggling. What makes this inversion so chilling is how effortless it becomes. The same way they once instinctively knew how to make someone feel better, they now instinctively know how to make someone feel worse. They don't have to think about it or plan it. The cruelty flows as naturally as their kindness once did. They begin to see everyone's emotional needs as weaknesses to exploit rather than wounds to heal. The friend who always needs reassurance becomes someone they withhold validation from. The family member who struggles with insecurity becomes someone they systematically undermine. The partner who needs emotional support becomes someone they emotionally abandon in their moments of greatest need. The most disturbing aspect of this inversion is how much pleasure they begin to take in it. After years of feeling everyone else's pain as their own, there's something intoxicating about watching others suffer while feeling nothing but satisfaction. They've discovered a way to finally stop absorbing everyone's emotions by becoming the source of negative emotions instead of the sponge that soaks them up. Jung understood that this wasn't random cruelty. It was precision-guided revenge against a world that had exploited their sensitivity for years. Every person they hurt represents everyone who ever took advantage of their kindness. Every boundary they violate represents all the boundaries others violated against them. Every emotional wound they inflict is payback for every emotional wound they absorbed from others. They become masters of emotional manipulation, using their deep understanding of human psychology to orchestrate complex scenarios where others hurt themselves. They don't need to be obviously cruel. They can arrange situations where people's own insecurities and fears do the damage. They plant seeds of doubt, create artificial scarcity of their attention, and manipulate group dynamics to isolate their targets. The same person who once made everyone feel seen and understood now makes everyone feel invisible and misunderstood. They withdraw their emotional support not gradually, but strategically, right when people need it most. They stop being available not because they're busy, but because they want others to feel the abandonment they've felt their entire lives. Their ability to read people's emotional states becomes a tool for psychological warfare. They can sense when someone is having a good day and find subtle ways to ruin it. They can detect when someone is feeling confident and know exactly how to undermine that confidence. They can spot when someone is feeling loved and supported and figure out how to make them feel isolated and rejected instead. Jung warned that when we repress our shadow for too long, it doesn't just emerge, it takes revenge. The dark empath's cruelty isn't random or impulsive. It's the calculated revenge of someone who has finally stopped caring about being good and started caring about getting even. They've transformed from emotional healers into emotional terrorists, using their intimate knowledge of human psychology to create suffering instead of alleviating it. This inversion represents the complete corruption of their greatest gift. The empathy that once connected them to others' pain in service of healing now connects them to others' pain in service of increasing it. They've become the very thing they once protected others from. Someone who uses emotional intimacy as a weapon rather than a bridge to understanding and connection. The destructive power of the dark empath. Once an empath fully embraces their shadow, they become something uniquely terrifying in the landscape of human psychology. Jung understood that those who possess the deepest capacity for good also possess an equal capacity for evil. And dark empaths prove this theory in the most chilling way possible. They don't just become harmful. They become devastatingly effective at destruction because they're working with years of accumulated knowledge about human vulnerability. The dark empath operates like a psychological surgeon turned torturer. They know exactly where to cut to cause the most damage while leaving the fewest visible scars. Unlike other harmful personalities who might be obvious in their cruelty, dark empaths are masters of plausible deniability. They can destroy someone's self-esteem, relationships, and mental health while maintaining the appearance of being reasonable, even helpful. Their destructive power comes from an intimate understanding of human attachment and emotional dependency. They've spent years being the person others turn to in crisis, which means they've mapped out everyone's deepest fears, strongest needs, and most vulnerable moments. Now they use that map not to provide comfort, but to inflict maximum psychological damage. They become experts at emotional starvation. Just as they once provided emotional nourishment to everyone around them, they now withhold it strategically. They know that someone who's been receiving constant emotional support will suffer more from its sudden absence than someone who never had it in the first place. They create artificial emotional famines in the lives of people who had grown dependent on their care. The dark empath's cruelty is particularly insidious because it's often invisible to outside observers. They might systematically undermine someone's confidence through subtle comments that sound like concern. They might isolate someone from their support network by sharing just enough of their secrets to make others uncomfortable. They might withdraw their presence from someone's life at the exact moment that person is facing their biggest challenges. Jung observed that shadow personalities often become inversions of our conscious ideals, and dark empaths exemplify this perfectly. Where they once built people up, they now tear people down. Where they once created safe spaces for vulnerability, they now punish people for being vulnerable. Where they once helped others heal from trauma, they now know exactly how to reopen old wounds. Their understanding of emotional cycles makes them particularly dangerous. They know when someone is most likely to be struggling, when they're most in need of support, and when they're least capable of defending themselves emotionally. They time their attacks not randomly but strategically, striking when their targets are already weakened by other life circumstances. The most frightening aspect of their destructive power is how they can turn entire social groups against their chosen targets. Because they understand group dynamics and individual psychological profiles so well, they can orchestrate social situations where others unknowingly participate in psychological warfare. They might share someone's private struggles disguised as concern, knowing it will change how others perceive that person. They might manipulate group conversations to highlight someone's insecurities or past mistakes. Dark empaths excel at creating what Jung might have called psychological traps, situations where their targets are damned if they do and damned if they don't. They might offer help in a way that makes refusing seem ungrateful, then use that help as leverage for control. They might create emergencies that require their target to sacrifice their own well-being, then criticize them for being selfish if they hesitate. Their ability to detect and exploit codependent patterns makes them particularly devastating to other empaths and people-pleasers. They can spot someone's tendency to overgive from miles away and then position themselves to be the beneficiary of that giving while simultaneously making their target feel guilty for not giving even more. Unlike narcissists or sociopaths who might lack empathy entirely, dark empaths have too much empathy, but they've weaponized it. They feel what others feel, but instead of being motivated to help, they're motivated to make those feelings worse. They don't just lack compassion, they have anti-compassion, actively working to increase suffering rather than decrease it. They become masters of gaslighting, not because they don't understand reality, but because they understand it too well. They know exactly what really happened in any situation, which makes them incredibly effective at distorting others' perceptions of those same events. They can make someone question their own sanity by selectively acknowledging or denying things they know to be true. The dark empath's destructive power is amplified by their reputation, because they spent so many years being the helper, the healer, the one everyone could trust. People are reluctant to believe they could be harmful. This gives them cover to continue their psychological warfare long after the damage has become obvious to their victims. Others will defend the dark empath, make excuses for their behavior, and blame their targets for being too sensitive or misunderstanding the situation. Jung understood that the shadow doesn't seek balance, it seeks dominance. The dark empath isn't interested in becoming a more balanced person who can be both kind and firm, giving and boundaried. They're interested in wielding the power that was denied to them during all those years of selfless service. They want to see how much damage they can do with the same skills they once used for healing. This makes them perhaps the most dangerous personality type of all. Someone with a healer's knowledge of human psychology and a destroyer's motivation to use it. They're fighting a war against a world they believe exploited their goodness, and they're fighting it with weapons forged from years of intimate access to human vulnerability. The irreversible transformation. The most haunting truth about the dark empath's journey is that once they cross into their shadow, there's rarely a path back to who they used to be. Jung understood that certain psychological transformations fundamentally alter the structure of the psyche in ways that can never be completely undone. The person who emerges from the wreckage of their collapsed empathy isn't just changed, they're permanently different in ways that affect every future relationship and interaction. This isn't a temporary phase or a healing crisis that leads to integration. The dark empath has experienced something that Jung called psychological death, the complete destruction of their former identity and worldview. When someone's entire sense of self was built on being helpful, caring, and emotionally available to others, losing that identity is like losing their soul. What grows back in its place may use the same body and answer to the same name, but it's fundamentally a different person. The transformation is irreversible because it's based on knowledge that can't be unknown. Once the empath sees clearly how they were used, manipulated, and taken advantage of, they can never unsee it. Once they understand how their kindness was exploited and their boundaries were violated, they can never return to that previous state of innocent giving. The trust that was broken wasn't just trust in specific people, it was trust in human nature itself. Jung observed that our most profound psychological changes happen not through gentle growth, but through crisis and breakdown. The dark empath has been through a psychological apocalypse that destroyed not just their relationships, but their fundamental beliefs about goodness, love, and human connection. They've learned that kindness is often weakness, that generosity invites exploitation, and that emotional openness creates opportunities for others to harm them. This knowledge rewires their brain in permanent ways. Where they once automatically looked for the good in people, they now automatically look for potential threats and manipulation. Where they once felt compelled to help, they now feel compelled to protect themselves at all costs. Where they once gave others the benefit of the doubt, they now assume the worst until proven otherwise. The most tragic aspect of this transformation is that it often proves itself correct. The dark empath's new, cynical worldview gets reinforced by reality because they become skilled at spotting the selfish motivations and manipulative behaviors they were blind to before. They see people using others the way they were once used, and this confirms their new belief that genuine care and connection are rare to non-existent. Their changed perspective creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because they now approach relationships with suspicion and defensiveness, they attract people who are comfortable with conflict and emotional distance. Because they're no longer willing to be taken advantage of, they push away anyone who might have genuine care to offer. Because they've become strategically cruel, they surround themselves with people who are either equally cruel or too afraid to challenge their behavior. Jung understood that some transformations represent not healing, but adaptation to harsh truths about reality. The dark empath has adapted to a world they now see clearly as filled with users, takers, and emotional predators. They've developed the skills necessary to survive in that world, but those same skills make them incompatible with genuine love, trust, and emotional intimacy. Even if they wanted to return to their former ways of being, which they rarely do, they can't simply choose to be naive again. They can't unknow what they know about human nature. They can't unfeel the betrayals they've experienced. They can't unsee the patterns of exploitation they've identified in almost every relationship they've ever had. The people who knew them before often hold on to hope that the real person will return someday. They wait for the kind, caring empath to re-emerge once this phase passes. But Jung would have understood that they're waiting for someone who no longer exists. The person they're mourning didn't go into hiding. They died. What remains is someone who may look the same, but operates from completely different values, motivations, and beliefs about human nature. This creates a unique kind of grief for everyone involved. The dark empath mourns the death of their former innocent self, while simultaneously feeling relieved to be free from the burden of endless giving. Their friends and family mourn the loss of someone who was a source of comfort and support, while struggling to understand this new person who seems incapable of genuine warmth or care. The transformation becomes permanent because it serves a function. The dark empath's new personality protects them from ever being exploited again. Their cruelty ensures that only the strongest people remain in their life. Their emotional unavailability prevents others from becoming dependent on them. They've built a psychological fortress that's designed to keep out anyone who might hurt them, but it also keeps out anyone who might love them. Jung warned that when we swing too far toward either extreme, too much light or too much shadow, we lose our humanity. The dark empath has become so committed to never being vulnerable again that they've lost the capacity for genuine connection. They've solved the problem of being hurt by others by becoming someone who hurts others first. But in doing so, they've traded their greatest gift for something that will ultimately leave them isolated and empty. This is the final tragedy of the dark empath. They've become everything they once stood against, and they can never go back to being what they once were. They're trapped in a personality that protects them from harm, but also prevents them from experiencing genuine love, and that trap is locked from the inside.